This is Marten Rabarts, Director of Whānau Mārama, New Zealand International Film Festival. And this is the first of our 2 masterclasses this festival. I just want to acknowledge that these masterclasses are supported by Creative New Zealand, our partner for artistic development. Thanks, Creative New Zealand. And thanks all of you for being here. Of course, most importantly, thank you, Jennifer Kent, for being with us.
Hi, Marten.
Jennifer, of course, as you all know, director of landmark films, The Babadook and The Nightingale, 2 very, very different films, but both made, constructed and crafted with equal amounts of passion for the content and the characters that live within them. Jennifer, you're in Brisbane right now, riding out some of your Australian lockdown. Lovely that you're here this morning again. Thank you so much. I think when people are looking at their own creative lives, I think it's really helpful sometimes to hear the origin story of some of those people who they've been, seeing their work, admiring their career trajectory. Let's just start with you sharing a little bit about, what's Jennifer Kent's origin story?
It doesn't involve the Babadook. I grew up in a household that wasn't particularly creative, so it was something in me to create, and even from an early age, from the ages of sort of 4 and 5, I really knew, which sounds crazy, but I knew what I wanted to do in this world. And I wanted to tell stories. So I just set about doing it at primary school. And, as soon as I could read and write, I wrote sort of small plays and put them on, much to the sort of annoyance of my teachers, I think. But they did eventually go with it and support me in doing that. But in terms of my family, I mean, I come from a very sort of, normal middle-class family. There was no sort of sense of, why don't you go out and be creative with your life? I mean, in fact, Dad, very much told each of us 5, told each child what he thought we should do. And wow. And funnily enough, my siblings ended up doing what he suggested or close to, but I was very headstrong, and he wanted me to be a lawyer. I think I would have murdered people by now if I'd become a lawyer. And I just said no. And I think, for a long time, I really perplexed him. But eventually he understood, towards the very end of his life, he went, oh, I get it. I understand, and I think he was really proud that I did say no to him.
Where was that exactly, just geographically?
In Brisbane.
In Brisbane.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think that's great to hear, because you are someone from the very beginning, as you just described, driven by something that within that you identified really early, not coming from any particular hotbed of film or television, like say Sydney or Melbourne, and yet pushing through.
I couldn't have been further away from a hotbed. It's like I didn't. I mean, Yeah, I grew up in an era where women weren't really directing films. I mean, there was Jane Campion and Gillian Armstrong, and there are others, I'm sure, and there were. I mean, other people women that I've since learnt of and watched their beautiful films, but I didn't even comprehend as a child, anyway, that women could direct films. I mean, I certainly didn't think that I could. So my aspirations were more to act, and I auditioned for NIDA and I got in, which was a big deal for me, and went through that process, but which I found quite damaging at the time. And I left there
just for our viewers, that's the National Institute of Dramatic Art in Australia. So it's the National Drama School.
Yeah. I mean, Kate Blanchett was in the year below. Essie Davis, who was in the lead in the Babadook, was in the year below. So it was in the pursuit of excellence, that school, and it really. And I studied for 2 years. I studied acting in Brisbane at a wonderful school where the teacher came from Guildhall, and he was very focused on reading the classics. So I really got acquainted with Chekhov and Ibsen and all of these beautiful playwrights and their words and these emotions. And I think it really inspired me. But by the end, I was burnt out already. I had terrible stage fright, and I didn't want to act anymore. I did for a good 6 or 7 years, and then I said, no, I want to go back to writing and directing. And I didn't know how I was going to do it, but
somewhere along there, you just said, I didn't know as a child that a woman could be this thing, a film director.
Yeah.
You knew about perhaps some big names. Was there a particular moment where that clicked over and you went, actually, this woman can be a film director, this particular one?
Well, I remember when I was 27, I said to a friend, I read this book called Women Who Run with the Wolves. It's an amazing book. It's about story and myth. And I said to my friend, God love her, she had the best intentions, but I said, I want to be a film director. And she looked at me and said, why do you have to make everything so hard for yourself?
If only she knew.
And I thought, fuck you. So I quietly went about making things really hard for myself for the next few years, and wrote, a lot of really probably very bad things, but just kept writing. And I didn't know I could be for sure a director, but I was starting to feel that I could. I wanted to, and the desire was so strong I couldn't think of anything else. And I sacrificed a lot personally to do that. But then I think it was the moment that I saw Dancer in the Dark in the cinema, and I still remember how the room was, and I remember, leaping up at the end and saying, I'm going to go and work with the man who made this film. I have to find out what they're doing over there. Because I'd seen Feston a few months before, and I was like, what are they doing? And again, some well-meaning friends sort of nodded their heads and looked at me as if I was a little bit mental. And then I wrote to Lars. I got my friend to call up their Filmburen and ask what his email address was. I shouldn't be saying this, but anyway, they gave it to me. They wouldn't do it now, I'm sure. But, and I wrote him a really heartfelt letter saying, I don't want to go to film school. I'm not good in institutions. I'd rather stick pins in my eyes than go to film school. And maybe it was that got his attention, a woman wanting to stick pins in her eyes. But he said, I got a message back. Initially, I got a message back saying, no, he never lets anyone on set. Thank you for your interest, but no. And then I got an email about half a day later saying, Lars has just read your email. He wants to know what you want to do.
Wow.
And I think I said something really naive, like I'd want to be first assistant director or something like that. And they were like, well, no way. But, and then it was a process of negotiation. And they said, all right, we'll give you 1 day on set if you're willing to travel from Australia to Sweden.
And for one day.
Yeah, for one day.
That's quite an offer, and you took it.
Yeah, I took it. And I thought, this is going, I feel so strongly about this. I'm just going to take a risk and see. And it ended up that I was there, you know, watching the whole process.
And that film was?
Dogville.
Yeah.
And I watched the whole process. You know, I was there for the whole production period. But the reason I bring up that story is because often, you know, I'll get people contacting me through my manager or whatever saying, can you help me? And I think, well, I helped myself, you know. I mean, you have to be so, not that you necessarily all have to rush out and contact Lars von Trier, please don't. But you know, it was something that process, and also seeing him in action and seeing that he was, you know, a flawed human like we all are, helped me realize I can do this. So I think in answer to the very long answer to your question.
No, beautiful answer. Thank you.
That was the experience where I thought I can do this. And then I just set about writing, and, you know, it wasn't easy after that. I mean, Babadook was knocked back by Screen Australia. You know, I got so much criticism all the way through that film. I had to prove myself.
Can I just ask, was the criticism, and I really want to talk about the Babadook because that's, you know, where our paths crossed happily. Yeah. But two things. One, was it because you were a woman stepping into a genre space which was not necessarily well populated with women? I mean, increasingly so now. We have 2 genre films in our festival, Maddie Doe's The Long Road and Natalie Erica James's Relic, you know. And
Relic I've seen, which is a beautiful film. Yeah.
So, you know, there's a great deal of fascinating work coming out of the genre space. Do you think you're being boxed in as both a woman and perhaps even boxed in because as an actress, a trained actress wanting to direct? Those are 2 different boxes.
No, I think I didn't feel it in Australia. I think there's a pretty healthy tradition of female directors in Australia.
True.
I have felt that in other areas. I certainly felt it with The Nightingale, my presence as my gender overtaking the sort of experience. But with Babadook, I think it was the strangeness of it. You know, I had a meeting with 2 Screen Australia people. They used to just have 2 people deciding production at that point. And they said to me, you can't have, you know, they said, well, is it real or is it not real? And I said, yes. And they said, which? And I said, no, they said, is it real or is it psychological? And I said, yes. And they said, well, what is it? You can't have both. And I said, well, I think you can have both. Because there's a tradition of horror where you do have both, you know. And I think I pulled out of the air The Shining and a few others, and they said, yeah, but you're not Kubrick, you know. So I wanted to name my autobiography, The End of My Life, I'm not Kubrick. Of course I'm not Kubrick. I'm not citing a film because I think I'm Kubrick. I just wanted to say that they exist. So I guess that's an example of the kind of blocks. And also, this was just every step of the process. I even remember we were at a final cut of Babadook, and I'd been through shit to protect the script. So we got rejected by Screen Australia, and then we went back. And they said, you need to change the script significantly. I really think I changed 2 pages, and they were like, now we're talking, you know. And it was pretty much the same script. But you know, you have to be slippery and find the way through.
Before that, you did make a short film with the same story space. That sort of put your mark. You put a mark in the sand. Like I am a director.
Yeah, I think if I hadn't made that short, it would have been impossible to make Babadook. I just don't think I didn't make the short thinking I would make Babadook, by the way. People think I did. I didn't. It was just, I had a period of making, I think I wrote 3 or 4 full-length feature scripts that wouldn't get made. Couldn't get made, couldn't get funded. And I said, either I give up or I go outside of Australia to develop this idea based on Monster. And that's where the Binger came in. And I'm not just saying it because of you, Marten, but Binger really saved my creative life. I mean, at the time you couldn't really make film. People weren't making films, easily on very low budgets. So it felt like either I get support to develop this elsewhere.
Well, yeah, that was, I mean, just also to give further context for those of people who are watching, the Binger Film Lab in Amsterdam was a creative residence for writers and directors, and Jennifer was part of that, and our paths crossed because I was artistic director of that at the time. But there are two things in this, I think. One, that you were looking for something that was overseas again, like, perhaps it's set in that the Binger was in Amsterdam, it was in the Netherlands, close to Denmark. You were searching for a deeper knowledge in other places than the usual, which, was that conscious, or was it just you weren't finding what you needed at the time?
I think I'm drawn to the top end. I think the wonderful thing about Binger was this sense of, my script editor, Marietta von Hauswolf von Baumgarten, wonderful person who said, I don't want to hear about structure. I don't want to hear you talk about, and I'd been so wounded by feedback, not just from Screen Australia, but just bad script editors. And I didn't know what to do anymore. And what Binger gave me was freedom. And it's the same thing I encountered in Sweden on Dogville as well, is this sort of anarchic sense of self, and I need to express what's coming out of me, so please don't get in the way. Just support me and give me feedback that's helpful and specific. And that's what I
know Marietta, I thought was a great mentor for you. And finally, because we actually, I'm going to, full disclosure, when Jennifer joined us, we each person in that process had a particular mentor, as well as the community of filmmakers around her. And we had placed Jennifer with the genre guy, who was from North America and really, really good in his business. And you said, please, I don't need a genre guy.
No,
I need someone
I'm the genre guy.
who needs, who I can learn from, about character, about psychological integrity, about diving deep and going crazy. So we gave you Marietta.
Yes, and also about emotion, because I think, if people ask, well, what's the thread of all your work, and including the work I'm doing now, like the scripts I'm writing now, it's deep feeling and emotion. So one, I wanted a woman, and I wanted someone who could connect to the emotional truth. And the wonderful thing about Marietta is she didn't have any knowledge of horror. And in fact, she was terrified of horror. So we had this thing where she'd read the script and she'd go, oh my God, I'm so scared reading the script. But she then would be very, detailed and incisive with her criticism. And it brought something very, very beautiful to the script.
And it was a learning experience for all of us. For me, that was the moment I really started to understand what the Babadook was, because on paper, at first, when we first encountered it, it had all the hallmarks of a really powerful horror, which it is. That question you were talking about emotion, about character, which carries over, of course, deeply into your work in The Nightingale. I'm going to try and, how do I phrase this simply? Just, what's the beginning of building a character for you, I suppose, is the simplest question. Where do you start with a character?
I usually start with a feeling of something that, I want to communicate. And it can be quite amorphous, and, it sits in a realm that's usually outside words. And then the character sort of arrives. And
walks in the door, or creeps under the door.
Creeps out from under the bed.
Yeah.
I really love David Lynch's approach, and I feel he's been in some ways my mentor by proxy. I've never met him, but I feel a real kinship. And I think he talks about this idea of catching ideas, and I think that's how I've always been. And he articulated something that I've always done when I get out of the way. So what I'm doing, I can share what I'm doing at the moment. You know, every time I
Please.
write something new, I feel I can't write. I go through this every time and I think, I can't write. How do you even write? How do you put a story together? And then I've started doing, I don't know if you've heard of Marten, the Artist's Way, but there's this thing called morning pages.
Okay. Yes. Yeah.
And I do that every morning now just to get out of my own way. So I write 3 pages, stream of consciousness. And then I sit and I go to where I am in the story. And the character, I might talk to the character. So literally, I'll write to them. How are you? Nancy is the character of the moment. And she's an ornithologist. And she's lost a baby and she's in her mid-40s. And it's a story that Guillermo del Toro started and gave me to run with.
Wow.
So in this way, the character was established. She was an ornithologist with those details. Oh, I'm sorry, my phone's going off. So I talk to the character and I try not to, and then I do a lot of research on ornithology. And then slowly, this thing that you thought could never, ever take place and take shape starts to take shape.
I thank you for sharing that. The idea that you, with such a, clear, strong voice in works that are just, crystal clear and sharp in their realization, to know that you start from a place that is amorphous, that you think maybe I don't know what to write this time, I think is just a really useful thing to hear.
Yeah, and I mean, I will share too that during this lockdown, I've had a terrible creative block, writer's block. It's been frightening actually. And I thought, can I write again? Can I do this? And the way through has been morning pages and meditation and reaching out to dear writer friends and friends who are not writers,
That's just what I wanted to talk about, because I know that within that being a lab process, that was as much about the other filmmakers that you were in community with.
Yeah.
And I was speaking the other night to Justin Kurzel and Essie Davis in regard to our opening film, True History of the Cali Gang. And they were talking about a collectivity, and then from both of you, and they said, oh, but we're great friends with Jennifer, and vice versa. So you have a community out there that you refer to, and I've seen you continue the deep relationships you formed in Amsterdam with filmmakers in Israel.
I'm working with Tali Shalom Azia, beautiful Israeli filmmaker. We're creating a series together about personal stories that happened in our hometown. I don't have many director friends. I wish I had more actually. But we need each other. I recently had to make a big decision on a big offer for a big film with Justin, and I've chosen to go and make my small, love story next year, which is going to be so hard to make, and we don't have enough money and all of those things. It's going to be made in America, but it just kept sticking in my heart. And so, talking to Justin, he knows me well, and we talked through for an hour or two, and I was able to make that decision in good faith, and I know it's the right decision. So yeah,
something lifted on you.
Yeah, it was there are a lot of toys out there especially once you make a low budget horror film that doesn't look like shit. Babadook was made for $1.6 million US. Yeah. Americans go, oh my God, she can make that for that. Like, what can we get her to direct?
Yeah.
So I've had a lot of that. And, my agents say we have never met someone with more integrity, which is lovely. I think they're also a bit puzzled by it, but they really support me, which is wonderful. So.
And that's great that they do understand that you are a particular, if you like, commodity in their world, and they need to work with you, not sort of just throw stuff at you.
Yeah. Hey, I think once they saw The Nightingale, they realized, Okay.
Got it.
Now we understand.
Yeah. No box for this one.
Yeah.
I just had a question come up, and it's about the writing, and you were speaking about developing from emotion, finding an emotion, and from that comes the character. How much does that determine a story outline, like a narrative arc of a character? What do you have ideas of a story arena that the character might inhabit, and together with, as you talk to your character, do you
I
discover
think,
what happens?
well, I think with Babadook, I had this, grief and grieving is a long running theme in my life. I have close proximity to it, and I know it well, and I wanted to talk about it. So in terms of Babadook, that was the starting point. And it always fascinated me, and this is with no judgment, but it just, intrigued me that people could sit on terrible grief for, 5, 10, 20 years, 30, their whole life, and what happened to those people. And I really felt enormous compassion for that state, because I think it's, a deep sadness. And I wanted to explore that in a way that wasn't melodrama. And it just, the idea, of facing grief came to me and wanted to be discussed, and it wanted to come in a scary form. And I can't intellectualize that or say why.
Right.
Other than I think, it was C.S. Lewis that said, I'm paraphrasing, but he said something along the lines of, no one ever told me that grief felt so much like fear.
Wow.
And I do feel that, it's maybe a fear of feeling, but it's a definite sort of terror, a specific terror that comes up with grief. So that was my starting point. And it was all emotional.
Yeah.
Rather than intellectual.
You mine aspects of your personal history, your personal life. You just said you had an understanding of grief that doesn't go away, and that was part of the birth of the Babadook. Also, looking at the Nightingale, that's a kind of collective howl of rage, I suppose, and from two points of view: one, an Australian-Irish point of view. And a very strong connection, of course, to an Aboriginal point of view who suffered alongside each other, certainly in historically, but also in your film. Where was the birth of that, like, urgent need to tell that story? Because it's such a hard story to tell. It must have had an urgency that drove you like nothing else.
Definitely. I mean, it was the hardest thing of my life and the thing I'm most proud of. But it was so difficult. I mean, talk about making, the friend who said making things hard for yourself. She's right in some ways, because, I mean, I feel as an Australian, I couldn't live in Australia and not face this story on some level in my work. And I just kept coming back to it. And I knew that I couldn't tell it unless I had collaboration with Tasmanian Aboriginal people. So that was I remember going with my nephew, who was a young adult at the time. Him and his girlfriend, we went to Tasmania, and I traced the steps, if you like, of Claire and Billy's journey. And I thought, I had a meeting while I was there with an elder Aboriginal woman, and she said, you can't make this story because we will insist on Tasmanian Aboriginal actors, and none of them are dark-skinned enough to tell the story. That was her response. And so I went away pretty crestfallen and devastated, and went, okay, and couldn't find anyone else. But the story kept coming back. Please tell me, please tell me. And so I kept looking for an elder, for someone, and eventually everyone kept saying Jim Everett, he's the man for this. And they said, but he won't, he's too busy. He's got a million things on. I got in touch with him and he said, I'm too busy, got a million things on. Give me the synopsis and I'll have a read. And I gave it to him and he said, I'm still too busy, but I can't not be involved in this. this story needs to be told. You know, he as a young Palawa man didn't even know he was Aboriginal. His parents didn't tell him. They said he was Maori, and you know, for some reason that was less shameful.
Wow.
He didn't find out until he was a young adult, and you know, he'd been an Aboriginal rights activist since the 60s. He's in his late mid to late. He's about 77 now. But it was his love that sung the story into existence, and his honouring of his ancestors. And you know, he invited us down to his house, me and Christina Seaton, the producer, and we stayed there for a week, and we talked, and you know, we talked about the story, and we read from various texts, and we set off after that journey, and then I went and wrote the first draft, and he was there. I get very emotional when I think about him, because I love him so much, and you know, occasionally he'll email and say, "I love you, Jennifer," and it was a really strong bond that was formed.
And
when we sorry,
no, go ahead.
When we finally screened the film for the Palawa people down there, at the very end of this sort of long, arduous publicity trek that you were on a little bit of, you saw a part of it, I was very exhausted and a little heartbroken. And you know, the session that we had with Jim and those journalists, like, he was so protective of me, and you know, I can't thank him enough for that. And more importantly, you know, the Palawa people that I spoke with at the screening were very moved and really happy that the film was out there, as hard as it is. Because believe it or not, when we were researching, I read things far more horrible than what are in the film.
I remember you saying in a Q&A in Sydney, I think it was, you said, if I couldn't possibly have filmed the things that actually happened.
No.
And I mean, just your journey to know that those things were there and that they didn't belong in this particular story must have been also grueling, because...
It was grueling.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I was there. I mean, but how grueling was it for the people who experienced those things, you know, and who continue to experience those things? And that's what kept me going, is I'm just reenacting this. Like, I'm carrying the kind of psychic weight of this because it happened, but that's it, all the more reason to tell this story, you know. And there've been criticisms. Why should we tell this story? You have no right to tell the story. Well, I asked for permission, and I asked for the right, and I collaborated, and we got the right. So I think there's the answer there. But why tell the story? Because look at the world. You know, we can easily think these things have stopped happening, but they exist right now in the world.
Absolutely. One of the things that I was that touched me when I was reflecting on the choice of the true history of the Kelly Gang, which I know you've still yet to see, is the parallels between, you know, a police force that are abusing the people they're meant to be taking care of, that are serving a corrupt power far higher than they. You know, this is just, there are so many contemporary parallels in that Australian historical narrative, which is being retold by Justin. And I think the reflection on the past, which you do so uniquely, powerfully in The Nightingale, is an essential contribution to understanding who we are. And I think your film spoke very clearly to us over here as well, because we're also still dealing with a post-colonial history.
Yeah. Well, you know, strong times require strong measures, and sometimes a gentle tap on the face doesn't work. And absolutely. I think it's, you know, it is tough to bear. It was tough to make. You know, if you think, oh, it's tough to watch, you can imagine sitting with that in your soul for 3 years, 4 years, more, longer, 5, including the writing. But I think that ultimately the film, and what I really wanted to tell, is a story of love and the transcendence of experience, of race, of gender, and just to at the end, you know, have two people, humans, together in that moment without knowing, without knowing what's to come. And, you know, I think there's been some criticism that I've conflated those two stories, but there's no intention to compare. I don't think you can compare another's experience. And, you know, it's in true way, and we're left with the real human beings.
Absolutely. And, you know, that's what good art always does. It puts up a mirror, and if we find ourselves in it, all to the good. I think the art is working. We have some questions coming in. One is from Claire Von Beek, who's a filmmaker here in New Zealand, and an award-winning filmmaker here in New Zealand as well. Claire, I'll just ask my team, can we bring Claire in to pose her question to Jennifer herself? Let's see if Claire pops up. If she doesn't, which she's not, I will, I'll ask it on behalf of Claire. Claire asks, and it's also, I think, relates to where we are in your journey from Babadook to Nightingale, where you are now, but also going back. You started by saying, you know, people accused you of not being Kubrick.
Don't tell anyone that I'm not, will you?
I know. Are you not? We have Kubrick on Kubrick in our film festival.
Oh,
here.
wow.
That's documentary. So, you know, we've got both of you. Yeah. But the question is, if you were making the Babadook as your first feature in 2020, do you think those sort of, you know, reductive comments would still appear, or have we shifted away from that kind of attitude, or do you feel it's still present? Is the question.
I don't think it's still present as much. No, I think you know, I mean, just to finish off that story about the Babadook, I all the way through. So the only reason I'm harping on about it is because I want young filmmakers, emerging filmmakers, to understand that resistance and disapproval and rejection are part of it. So it wasn't like I sailed in, made the Babadook, everyone went, wow, that's great, let's go and put it on at Sundance. You know, the script was criticized heavily, the production, the cut was criticized. And that's what I wanted to say was, in the fine cut screening, this guy turned up, looked like Krusty the Clown, and he said, I hate this film. It's, you know, you open the floor to, and this is a fine cut that hasn't really changed from what you see. Didn't have sound. Open the floor. I hate this film. You know, it's got to be more like Wreck. It's not scary. It's boring. You need to chop like 30 minutes out of it. And it was a 96-minute film. So, and I said to my editor, who's that guy? And he said, no, I said to the producer, who's that guy? And she said, oh, that's our distributor. So I found it funny.
You can't please everyone, but you'd hope that he kind of loved it.
I had to. So he rang Screen Australia and said, you know, make her cut it. And they said, no, you know, they've got final cut. And, you know, I'm very grateful to Screen Australia for protecting the film. But not all films get protected. So if I can say to you, Claire.
Actually, Claire's here. She's here. There she is. So you can speak to her directly.
Okay. Hi, Claire. I don't know where you are in the process, but, you know, I think the one thing I learned from Lars von Trier is stubbornness. That's not to say be rigid and be inflexible and don't listen to feedback and don't take criticism. You'd be a fool not to take a great idea. But I learned stubbornness, and I was incredibly stubborn with the Babadook. You know, I refused to change the cut. I mean, I refused a lot of things there. And I think that if I had have taken all the feedback, that it would have been a terrible film. So I think I like to think that me being that stubborn has hopefully paved the way for younger female filmmakers in this region of the world to make films that are a bit weird, you know, a bit left of center. I mean, just as I benefited from Jane Campion and Gillian Armstrong and, you know, filmmakers, strong female filmmakers that have come before me. So I think don't use that as a, oh, you know, it's because I'm a woman or anything. Just ignore those things and focus on the work. Focus on the integrity of the work, protecting the work, because the work is everything, and make it as good as it possibly can be, so that people can't stop it from coming into being.
Yeah, that's great. I actually wrote to Zintropa in 2004, but I never got a response. So
I'm probably like, we've had one from that area.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'll use that line next time. Pins in the eyes.
Yeah. But I think if there is that thing of wanting to really contact someone and, you know, having a strong, then try it. Not saying it's going to come about, but I think as a director, male or female or otherwise, no one is going to say, here's your career. No one. It's, you know, no one's going to offer you a directing job. So it takes that tenacity.
Can I just interject? Claire, would it be all right if I shared a link of Daniel with Jennifer? Because I think it's something she'd appreciate, which is your film.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love that.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Jennifer, I'll do that after we've wound up here, but it's a work that you'll definitely appreciate, I'm sure.
Right.
Hey, we have another guest coming on to ask a question. This is Eamon Atkinson, who's joining us from New York. Eamon is a director of one of the films here in our program. We just premiered his film Steelers, the world's first gay rugby club, which is pretty much self-descriptive. It's about a film about the world's first gay rugby club. So Eamon, please jump in.
Yeah, hi Jennifer. Thanks. I found this fascinating. I love both your films.
Thanks, Eamon.
Well.
Thank you.
So I was just wondering, how do you know when an idea is good enough to sort of stick with and sort of put all the effort in to develop it?
Yeah, I think for me, because I meditate, I like to keep the decks clear. If an idea sticks with me, it just won't go away. So it keeps coming up and up. I won't share the entire saga of this Tiptree sci-fi series I'm working on, but I had been getting a lot of sci-fi scripts, and I thought they're almost good, but there's just not this sort of feminine through line. Like, they're all quite masculine in story sort of themes, and they didn't interest me. So I Googled female science fiction writer and came up with Tiptree, James Tiptree Jr. And you can go and Google this person, but this idea would not leave me alone, you know, and it was also based on the works of another human being, but it just kept, and I've been dogged by this story for 5 years. So in answer to your question, it's just an idea that just will not quit. And in regards to that, you know, I've had to chase the rights. My agent said, you will never, ever get the rights to this woman's story. We have the rights to all her stories. Not all her stories, but her story, her life story, we have the rights to. And we also have the rights to 15 of her sort of most important short stories for this series. And just, you know, I'll share one sort of incident in this whole Tiptree saga. One of the rights were held in a basement. You know, this woman wrote stories in the 70s, and they were sort of held in basements on pieces of yellowed paper. And so the lawyer said, yes, this main story of hers is available. And then after a year and a half working on it, they said, no, it's not available. You can't have it.
Oh, wow.
And I said, and we were absolutely gutted. And I said, well, who's got it? And they said, we can't tell you. And I was like, oh my God, I've just spent 2 years working on this woman's story. And I flew to LA the next day, was having dinner with one of the only friends I had in LA at the time and knew. And she said, oh, you seem a bit down. And I said, oh, yeah, I've just been working on this sci-fi story and the woman's rights. We've lost the rights to this major story. And she said, oh, what's it called? And I said, The Girl Who Was Plugged In. And she said, my friend just bought the rights to that story. And then we chased it. And it was with this producer who had the television rights and the film rights. He said, I want to make a film. You can have the TV rights as long as I can be a producer. And we teamed up, and he's been amazing. So the way I like to work is the curly way. I don't say I must force an idea into existence. I'm going to tell this story, force. The ideas that keep coming up and going, hey, I need to be told.
It sounds like the ideas are like banging on the door going, let me in.
Yeah. Doesn't mean they're easy. It's not like, oh, I sit down, I meditate, and then I go to the desk and, oh, it's all, wow, great. And everything comes to me. No, like the last week I've had calls with my writer friends saying, I cannot write. This story is boring. It's stupid. This is normal. It's a normal part of the process. That's
so great for people to hear. Thank you for that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and that's why I want to bring up about Babadook, you know, the sort of shit fight elements involved with that, because it's important to know that this is a part of the process.
Yeah.
Part of being creative.
There's a really nice question that's come up that relates to that from Sarah McMullen.
So, Eamon, I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. It's really inspiring, this talk. Thank you.
Oh,
sorry, Eamon, I didn't mean to dump you. Just
no, please.
Moving on.
Moving on. That was lovely. No. So the questions from Sarah McMullen. You're obviously a very empathetic person, someone who sits with their work, feels it deeply. How do you look after your own well-being, you know, during filming, but also possibly now during development, and through publicity? And then when you go home, what are the things that you do to care for yourself?
Look, you know, I think it's a really good question, Sarah. And I think it's an important one, because I have made both films and come out wrecked. And so with my manager now, I'm working on how do I not be wrecked, you know, at the end. I think having a good assistant is one, but I also think self-care. I am incredibly sensitive and I am empathetic, and I've suffered, especially after Nightingale. You know, it's taken a long time to recover. I think it's important to have good people around you, have good producers, have great crew, have a really, really supportive first AD. I cannot stress that. If you're going to go into a feature, make sure you find someone who's on your team, on your side. Give yourself enough preparation time. Don't rush into a film. Everyone wants to make it now. Give yourself the preparation. You know, like the next film, Alice and Frida Forever, is being made in America, and Radek, the DP, and I, we want to start now, and it's being shot in next September. So give yourself a lot of time to prepare. Recce, you know, to do all your scouting and get all of that done well in advance if you can. It's always madness, but then afterwards, you know, what I'm going to do next time is give myself a 2-week break after the shoot, not go into the edit, just rest. And then, you know, once the film is finished, I mean, and during the edit, like I do, meditation is a huge part of my life, and it has been for a long time, but very much now I, you know, meditate twice a day, and this is not like an ad for meditation, but it's just something I've found really helpful. You know, massages, good quality time away from your work. I'm still working on those things. But yeah, you need to unplug. You know, you need to, yoga is another thing I do. You need to find things that give back, and self-care, daily self-care is important. Yeah.
I just thank you for that. I think there was a basket full of really wise information in that.
Oh, really?
When you're shooting, I mean, the relationships that we're speaking about, having a community to turn to, some of the people that you described the relationship with your first AD, you know, the heads of department around you. But one of the things that is a signature of your work is the extraordinary casting. And you know, we're sort of heading towards our final Straight on Time. And I didn't want to leave you without opening up this question of casting, because it's all very well to have an extraordinary character on the page and in your head who you've been in a conversation with, but you have to have that character you've built start to have a conversation with someone who'll embody them. And Essie Davis, Aileen Franciosi, I mean, these are just extraordinary. And and by Kali, you know, it's like the performances that you find with your cast are just breathtakingly powerful and memorable and life-changing, like really touching you in ways that you just...
I mean, you know, 5 years actor training hopefully doesn't go astray.
Thank you, Nida.
Yeah, thank you, Nida, and thank you, Adat, which is the course I did here. And I really encourage any director who is sitting here listening to this, if you haven't done actor training, please go and do some now. Because the thing it will give you is empathy for actors. You know, you may not become the world's best actor, but you need to know how hard it is and how frightening it is to put yourself in those spaces that you're asking your actors to go to. I mean, Aisling and Bakerley and I, when we met again in New York, for the press tour, we hadn't seen each other maybe in a year, and we all started tearing up. You know, it was a very emotional thing. I mean, I adore actors, and if I choose someone, you know, I get this feeling, and I know that this person has to be in that role. And I had that with Ash. I felt, you have to play this, and I'm sure she won't mind me saying that we had a lot of, you know, famous people vying for that role, and I just couldn't do that. I needed to choose the right person, and we lost our funding, and I wore it, and it was the best thing, because we got financiers who were much more suited and much more supportive of me having final cut and having you know, mastery over the work that I wanted to create. Can you imagine someone coming in and cutting this from another perspective? It wouldn't work.
That's craziness of the highest order.
Yeah. But it's normal in America. But you know, it's another thing I just want to say quickly about Final Cut. Please try and fight for Final Cut. I know it's not always possible. It maybe is more possible in New Zealand with the New Zealand Film Commission, or at least have your producers have Final Cut, as I did on Babadook, which meant I had Final Cut, because they were supportive, you know. Going back to actors, Marten, I think you need to assume on set, if you've cast correctly, and an actor isn't giving you what you need, it's your responsibility to get that, you know. And this is the thing, you need to find a way to work with actors, and each particular actor is different. Some might like to talk a lot, some are very emotional, they just want to be in their emotions, some are very visual, some need music. You need to respect each actor, and they're all working alongside each other, and you need to work out, how is that actor processing direction, and how can I help them get this performance? I cannot stress how important the bond is with actors. And for those of you who are interested in acting, I really urge you to go and watch today Derek Cianfrance's series, I Know This Much Is True, with Mark Ruffalo. It is just a masterclass in acting. And I can tell, and Aisling's in it actually, she has a small role, and I could tell from looking at it how much Derek loves actors. And, you know, when I spoke to him and when I spoke to Ash about it, it's very much the case. So you can't fake it. You can't edit around it. You have to learn about acting in order to help your actors be better.
That's deep and profound advice. Thank you. Hey, I was just thinking, we've spoken about the difficulty, which is totally understandable, and also the reward of fighting the necessary fights. What are one or two things, or just one thing that sparks joy, you know, that gives you the joy in the process, a thing that which you lightens your heart, lightens your spirit, and, you know, sustains you with the difficulties?
Yeah, I think it's this flow, you know, when I'm sitting in my office trying to write, and suddenly I'm lost in writing, and I haven't even realized that it hasn't been a struggle, and you know, 3 hours have gone by. And I texted my friend the other day and I said, what? I'm actually enjoying writing. And she said, that's because you're a born writer and you're getting all the shit out of the way and you're enjoying it. So I think, yes, I mean, I brought up the struggles to normalize them, I think, you know, in this talk, in this chat, but the joy is so important. And, you know, believe it or not, there was a lot of joy on the set of The Nightingale. There was, and a lot of love and a lot of cracking up, laughing, and because you have to, you know, this is our life. This is my life. If I'm struggling all the way through it, what's the point of life? You know, there has to be joy in the work. There was joy in the edit, in seeing the work come together. It's a miracle. It's like something in my head is now out there. What a miracle.
And look who went on the journey with me. I mean, this thing, you know, our film festival has been, we created a new identity, which is Whānau Mārama, which, you know, loosely interpreted, lyrically speaking, it describes the family of light. And in so many different ways. But I think what you just described, the making of the film, your cast, your producers who support you, your financiers who come on board, and they're the ones who really understand you. This is, you know, the family that is drawn by the light, which you are, you know, they come towards your light, and then together you know, you share it. There's a really beautiful, I just want to share a comment. It's more than a question, but it's from Nariki Natai, a Maori filmmaker. Thank you, Jennifer. I don't have enough words to express how grateful I am and how much I needed to hear your story today.
Oh, thank you so much.
She says, I'm a deep feeling woman also. And in brackets says, women who run with wolves is special to me too.
Yeah.
And saw so many parallels with your approach to my own. It's hugely helpful for filmmakers like myself coming through. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, is it Nariki, did you say?
Nariki. Yeah.
Nariki, thank you so much, Nariki, because, you know, we do this work, as I'm sure you do, to touch people and to move people, and never lose sight of that. You know, I think when things get really hard, as they often do, you know, if you hold on to the love in your work, then nothing else matters. You know, everything, all the difficulties fall away. You know, when I sit and watch, not that I sit and watch Nightingale, but in the final screenings, everything fell away because it's completed. You know, this thing that you set out to do, and all the love that's in there can feel is so important. You know, I just want to say too, to anyone who's struggling, who's listening, or struggling to believe in themselves, or, you know, everyone has something to say. That doesn't mean everyone needs to be a filmmaker, but follow your own voice, because, you know, there's a quote from, who made, Marten, help me out, the wonderful Polish filmmaker who made Three Colors, Kieslowski, said, you know, one thing I'm still really angry about at film school is no one told me that the most important thing you have to offer is your own voice. And, you know, I think that really rings loud and clear. And that's why a festival like, you know, the festival that you're now experiencing, the New Zealand Film Festival, is wonderful. You get to see everyone who's followed that through all the difficulty to arrive at a beautiful finished product, and look at how different all those things are, but how worthy they are. So
absolutely, thank you for that, because that idea of the unique voice is part of our curatorial thinking as we look at each film. You know, what is the voice of this film?
It's important.
And, you know, yours is so incredibly clear. We do, you know, we're coming to the end of our time, but just a couple of things. One is your next small, beautiful project that's going to be tough to make. What is that, and when, you know, what do we need to watch out for?
It is a love story between two girls set in the 1890s in Memphis, and I wanted to tell a love story. It just grabbed me by the heart, and it's about love, how you can't hold on to love, and how when you try it can turn to obsession. And so it's a sort of Juliet and Juliet story, I guess. And then there's Tiptree, James Tiptree Jr., basically, I'll keep it very brief, but James Tiptree Jr. burst onto this scene as a sci-fi writer. He was this amazing short story writer in the 60s and 70s, and no one knew who he was. And then for 10 years, he just poured out these incredible stories about gender and the need for empathy and, you know, the dehumanization of the world. And at the end of 10 years, it was discovered that he was a 61-year-old housewife living in McLean in Virginia. And so I'm making a 10-part, maybe 20-part series based on her life and work. It's going to be very surreal and sci-fi. So, and the last thing is the Guillermo del Toro story, which is he gave to me as a gift. And it's part of a series called 10 After Midnight that he is curating, and he's getting directors to tell these scary stories. So that's a short an episode.
But I mean, most exciting built within that is there's a lot coming down, you know, the road from you. So I know everyone listening is thrilled by that, knowing.
Oh, hopefully I better
not
get
just
back
one
to it.
project, but many more. So, and I just want to say that, you know, that time that you described where you need to, after a big project, take time for yourself and your writing work right now. And you actually came out of a kind of self-described, you know, quiet space in your working life to come and do this. So I just have to say how much I personally appreciate that you broke your own rule of being in retreat, which is a crucial place. So I can't tell you how grateful I am that you're able to.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
I know everyone listening is,
It's a pleasure, Martin. An absolute pleasure. And the last thing I did, and this is not an endorsement or an ad for The Artist's Way, but anyone who's really blocked, who's feeling it's a really good book to pick up. So go and have a look for it. It's the book that helped me become a writer. So it's worth having a look. But thank you so much, Martin. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. And, you know, huge love for the next part of this next journey.
Thank you. Love to you as well, Martin.